Welcome to The Blue Dot, Northern Kentucky's premier political podcast, brought to you by the Kenton County Democratic Executive Committee. Join co-hosts Natalie, MacDonald, and Brian Koehl as they explore the kitchen table topics affecting Kentuckians and the actions Democrats are taking to improve the lives of those living in the Bluegrass and beyond. Welcome back to the Blue Dot podcast. Thanks for joining. I'm Natalie MacDonald, and I'm here with my co-host Brian Koehl. How's it going, Brian?
Hey, Natalie. It's going about as well as can be expected, considering we have a president with a rap sheet longer than Tony Soprano's. But I'm seeing a lot of pushback from the courts and from everyday citizens like our listeners, which is being effective and giving me a lot of hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was so great to launch our first podcast. And the good news is our producer, Matt, set us a download goal for which we exceeded. So I wanted to give a little cheers to that.
Shout out to our producer, Matt Spalding. Matt puts a ton of time recording with us and then editing and producing the Blue Dot to make us sound good. Thank you so much, Matt. So, Natalie, what's been on your mind since our last podcast?
Well, goodness, Brian, it just seems like the entire political and economic world is just like one giant dumpster fire right now. But with the Derby coming up, one thing that I've been talking about is really how these Trump trade policies are again hitting Kentucky hard. And there's been some new developments this week that's really affecting, again, everything from bourbon to now our horses. So two things that all Kentuckians love. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those new developments. But what's been on your radar?
Well, something that has caught my attention is the withholding of disaster relief funds across the country by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, better known as FEMA. It has affected Washington State and then North Carolina and then Arkansas. And now Governor Beshear just announced a few days ago that funding has been denied for 8 Kentucky counties impacted by our recent flooding. What I initially understood this to be was Trump politicizing this support and favoring red states. But Arkansas, led by Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who is as Trumpy as they come, that's new.
And it's so interesting to see these red state governors petitioning the Trump administration for these funds, among other things. But we also have a really great guest tonight that's going to tie into what you spoke about last episode regarding the Kentucky supermajority.
Yeah, Natalie. In our last episode, we discussed Kentucky's Republican supermajority and its negative impact on passing legislation that actually helps Kentucky families. So as a follow-up this week, we thought we could take a look at the bills that Kentucky Democrats have put forth that would actually improve the lives of those of us here in the Bluegrass. To help us out with that, we've invited Currin to the show. Aaron ran for Kentucky's 65th House District and was endorsed by Governor Beshear. He really has a wealth of knowledge on these bills, and it should be very interesting to learn about the responsible legislation Democrats are trying to push through against the GOP supermajority. But first topic, I'm really intrigued about how these trade policies are hurting two huge Kentucky industries, bourbon and horses.
Yeah, I know you're a big bourbon fan. I wasn't sure if you're a Derby fan or not.
I am more concerned about the bourbon, I have to admit.
Okay, well, that's fair. But yeah, we just found out that Churchill Downs has paused nearly $900 million in planned renovations. And what's crazy about that is these renovations were supposed to be ongoing through 2028. So think about kind of like that economic blow that's going to happen because of that. And then to kind of add insult to this injury, Churchill Downs CEO just stated that they've been seeing lower Derby ticket sales, and it was directly linked to the timing of these Trump trade wars and the economic downturn. So, let's be real, Brian, when Churchill Downs suffers, Kentucky suffers.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, everything from the businesses down in Louisville to the horse farms in central Kentucky to the suppliers and vendors, all of this comes from, all of the 120 counties in Kentucky contribute to this in one way or another. So, first, it targeted our bourbon, and now it's devastating small businesses. And we saw good old Mitch McConnell up at CVG this week talking with the chamber about how badly these companies are being affected. Now it's at Churchill Downs. So once again, these policies are hurting real Kentuckians, while Kentucky Republicans continue to support an agenda that just damages our state's economy. And I think the people are getting really fed up with it.
Yep. And, this is exactly what's being reflected in the latest polling on Trump's performance. At the 100-day mark, there are several high-quality polls out that are assessing the Trump administration's performance, and they all show him underwater. in key areas such as the economy, tariffs, inflation, and foreign policy, even polling from Trump friendly Fox News. In fact, as of polling just out today, and we're recording on Monday, April 28th, a poll from the Washington Post and ABC News, Trump has the lowest approval rating at the 100-day mark ever recorded at only 39% of respondents approving of his job performance thus far. And what's even more shocking and important, 55% in this poll explicitly stated they disapproved of his performance. Frankly, that's a shellacking.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing it across all polls, right? And I think people are just saying enough is enough. And what's kind of happened that's been surprising to me is that at the events that we have, I've had several people come up and say that they've changed their registration from either independent or Republican to Democrat. One came up just the other day and said they changed their registration because they wanted to run as a precinct committee member. Another person just said they were just fed up with Trump. And then I had a registered independent tell me that she changed because of the Growing the Blue Dot campaign in Kentucky.
Oh, yeah, which is how we got our name. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And so for those who aren't familiar, the Growing the Blue Dot campaign is kind of this grassroots year-round training and engagement initiative launched by the Kentucky Democratic Party. But she said that really inspired her. And then I have 3 people in my personal life, can't make it up, who said that they were lifelong Republicans that changed because of Trump. And one of them is a friend of mine who's 75. And I know she didn't vote for Trump's, but it still surprised me. She said, "Hey, how do I change my registration?" And it kind of took me back a little bit because I think that's a real personal thing, but her take is, Brian, she said, the Republican Party no longer exists. MAGA's not conservative. They're not small government. And the cruelty is just not something that she can align with anymore. So I don't know. Have you been seeing this at all?
Well, I can definitely say that I have friends and have heard of others who are registered Republicans who absolutely do not support Trump nor the MAGA belief system. In fact, my father would be one of them. I know that many of these Republicans did not vote for Trump in the last election, although they may have voted for him in 2016 and possibly even 2020. But yes, they would now say that the traditional Republican ideas and values no longer exist within the party and that Trump and MAGA have destroyed it. And as a side note, I attended the Campbell County Democrats Trivia Night fundraiser last week, and one of the featured speakers was a woman who had changed her registration from independent to Democrat. She felt compelled to firmly declare her opposition to Trump and today's Republican Party in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's just crazy. And, with seeing these people coming up and talking about this voter registration thing, I kind of wanted to see if this was isolated or if it was something significant.
I think it's significant. People are rejecting Trumpism, especially now in this term.
Well, we like to keep the facts in focus. So I did go down the registration rabbit hole just to kind of look and see if there was some trends that we could see. And when we look at these swings through history, what we can see is that, they usually happen when people are really upset with either the current president or the party in power. So just for fun, Brian, I just want to ask you, so I looked at the trends, and which president do you think had the single largest period of partisan change this century?
Oh, you said this century, so
This century.
I guess Herbert Hoover is out, huh?
No, but that would be a good one, right?
Well, I'd say I guess it was either Clinton or Bush.
It was the second term of the Bush administration. So that was when Democratic registration surged. The Democrats got a 1.2 million voter advantage by the end of his term.
Wow. The Iraq War and the 2008 financial crisis probably drove that change, right?
Yeah, you know what? And it's just one of those things when there was just so much kind of going on at that time. On the other side of the coin, the single largest drop in Democratic Party partisan registration since 2000 took place during Biden's term. And that really kind of started showing by the end of his term. So by 2024 is where we saw it really drop off. So it kind of really was reflective of poor presidential ratings towards the end of his term. But then when Vice President Harris entered the race, there was this huge voter surge on the Democrat side. But as we know, it proved to be a little bit, a little too late. But from a historical perspective, I think that this Trump bump is more of a bend than a bounce. And it's really noticeable that these swings kind of happen with recession. So I think that if her history kind of serves as an indicator, over the next 4 years, the Democrats have a real opportunity to bring back like this surge in new voter registrations, especially as we see people just getting really burnt out and upset. And another place that we're seeing this, as you said, is with this FEMA assistance being cut.
Yeah, natural disasters are an unfortunate reality for many communities across the United States. From devastating floods to wildfires, FEMA has long been a lifeline for recovery and resilience. But like so many other federal programs under the Trump administration, FEMA is at risk that its support services will be greatly reduced or the department may be completely shut down. In general, Trump just believes that FEMA is a huge drag on the federal budget, and the responsibility for the bulk of this disaster relief should fall on the individual state. I think that's what we're really seeing here. In fact, both Trump and the head of FEMA, Kristi Noem, have publicly stated that they would like to eliminate FEMA. What exactly this means is unknown, but certainly it's not encouraging for the vast number of Americans and American communities who depend upon the program as a safety net.
Yeah, and it's just interesting that Kristi Noem, coming out kind of for eliminating it, but then last week she was kind of defending Governor Sanders. So it's just the same old game.
Same old game. And besides this latest withholding, or shall we say selective awarding of FEMA disaster relief, the Trump administration has also cut into FEMA's support infrastructure through recent cuts to the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, or BRIC, B-R-I-C. BRIC was established to provide grants to communities to proactively improve their ability to withstand natural disasters and climate impacts. For instance, developing building codes to make structures more hurricane-proof and resistant to floods, bolstering power grids and other infrastructure, and just increasing the capacity to care for people at the local level when disaster strikes. Not surprisingly, the greatest need for BRIC projects and funding is in disadvantaged areas, including native tribal communities.
Again, the red states are going to get hit the most here, and it's those people who need it the most who are going to be hurt.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing how Trump is hurting his own voter base, probably more than any other part of the constituency. Since the BRIC program began in 2020, it has distributed $5 billion in funds, and the Biden administration made $750 million in grants available right at the end of his term. But FEMA, under Trump and Noem, has canceled those Biden grants, including funding projects that are currently underway. This means there are half-completed projects that are being shut down.
And that's what's interesting because they don't have any contingency plan, right? They just shut it down midstream, and then people are standing there with projects, not complete. That's crazy.
Yeah, and there's no way that this actually saves the federal government money when you
Not
look
at
at
all.
it at the macro level. And we have one of those interrupted projects right here in Kentucky, or at least one. Our state has faced its fair share of flooding, including our recent once-in-a-decade flood that devastated the central and western parts of our state, and BRIC funding was allocated for a number of critical flood mitigation projects, including one to improve Louisville's flood control infrastructure. But now, $9.3 million in grants have been rescinded, and local officials are scrambling to find alternative funding sources. Like so many other short-sighted actions of the Trump administration, what is being ignored is that the BRIC money prepares communities for disaster before it strikes, and this type of preparedness actually saves money. It's estimated that for every $1 invested in disaster mitigation, it saves $13 in the back-end recovery costs.
They're cutting the prevention that's going to save us money in the long run. And that's just the BRIC program here in Kentucky. That doesn't even include the FEMA disaster funding that was denied this week.
Yeah, that's right. Governor Beshear just announced that although some funding was approved for the damage caused by the flooding in February, there are still 8 Kentucky counties for which that funding has not been approved. The governor noted in the same announcement that he's actively comparing the federal damage assessments to those by his own administration. He plans to appeal the decision. But to add insult to that injury, Governor Beshear has also requested major disaster declaration from President Trump on April 11th for the flooding that took place just earlier this month. And so far, that request has not been approved. And in that request, Governor Beshear asked for FEMA assistance for 46 Kentucky counties, and these were just the hardest hit. Other counties really should be added to this initial 46 counties and receive federal dollars to help rebuild.
Yeah, and I think we first saw FEMA assistance being cut out there in Washington after that, the bomb cycle that happened that cost tens of millions of dollars in damages. And I thought, well, that's a blue state. Maybe he's being partisan, but now we're
Right.
seeing it happen in the red states. And, it's crazy. Just to keep this into perspective, we never had a president talk about withholding federal funds because the state is red, blue, or purple. So the fact that we're even talking about that is pretty ludicrous.
Yeah, that's right. In North Carolina, Trump denied the state's request to extend the FEMA program that were covering expenses that were damaged from damage caused by Hurricane Helene. And you know how long ago that was.
Right.
And this is, of course, after he lied in saying that former President Joe Biden was withholding funds after the storm and that FEMA support personnel were absent from the area. All lies. But yeah, this foot dragging has spread even to Trump country. As mentioned earlier, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, along with Republican legislators in her state, and also those from Mississippi and Missouri, have been begging Trump to reverse his decision to deny FEMA funding to their region. And this is after deadly tornadoes and storms struck, leaving 40 people dead.
Well, it's also devastatingly sad, first of all. Second of all, the irony is really rich. You have Senators Tom Cotton and Boozman of Arkansas, Governor Sanders, and, we talked about Secretary Nome out there begging for help, but I don't know what they thought was going to happen. I mean, this is what they voted for. And encouraging your alcoholic friend to drink at your wedding and then being mad when they pee in the punch bowl, I think they thought they were immune from it, and maybe he'll release the funds if they beg enough. But back to the same thing is that none of this helps Americans in this country, not one bit of it.
No, it doesn't. And while we talk a lot about how Republicans are hurting Americans, we also, however, like to look at ways in which our Democratic leadership is trying to help people. Not only nationally, but also right here in Kentucky. To help us better understand what Kentucky Democrats are trying to accomplish in the legislature, we'd like to welcome to our pod our guest, Aaron Currin. Thanks for joining us, Aaron.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't we start? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you've become an expert on the bills that are floating through the Kentucky legislature?
Well, I don't know if I'm an expert, but I came about this because I ran for the 65th House District last year. And although I think we're really prepared, I think one of the things that we were missing out on, and one of the things I had trouble talking about, was just the bills. Because we always talk about the bills that were vetoed or were passed was largely by the supermajority. And so when we're talking about them, a lot of time we're kind of talking on defense. And when I was talking to voters, knocking on doors throughout Edgewood, Fort Wright, Park Hills, Covington, they would talk about the things that our Democrats are doing. I could talk to them about generally the issues. But as a lawyer, I was a little frustrated because I'm like, I need to know more about this. So after the election, I just kind of started pouring in and reading every bill. I read every bill this winter just so I could educate myself on it, because I think that's I think we just need that, if for no other reason, have a resource in Northern Kentucky, because there's a lot of media, as well as I think the elected officials in the parties and just the areas around here, I think sometimes are not doing as good a job because, quite frankly, it's hard to get anymore.
Yeah, and we are so happy to have you as that resource. The last episode of our podcast, we talked about those, as we called them, the bad bills that the Republican supermajority has been pushing through, or through vetoes, have made into law. And so we would like to wanted to address on this podcast, the good bills, the bills that Democrats are supporting and introducing and trying to push through the legislature, so our listeners can kind of have an idea of what the Democrats are trying to accomplish on the other side.
One of the things I think I kind of alluded to in the introduction is one of the things that's frustrating is a lot of times we're talking about politics and what's happening in Frankfort and D.C. for that matter, in terms of the way the majority, and especially in Kentucky, the supermajority wants us to talk about them. So we talk about these bad bills and good bills, but actually the good bills they are bills that are sitting in committee that the majority has, for whatever reason, have not put them through and let them see the light of day. Especially with under the handbook that was kind of the legislative handbook that the General Assembly creates for their new just for all their legislative members. they actually talk about the single biggest way to ensure that a bill gets through is you can pass it through committee. So that's kind of the determiner of whether it gets through it. So I wanted to kind of focus on those so we could kind of talk about them, because I think there's a lot of good bills, and I think we need to be talking about them. So basically, there was over 1,300 bills proposed, and there's only about 160 or 170 that had some type of decision on them through law, veto, or passed without veto. There's a lot of good domestic violence bills that are, especially for victims of domestic violence. There was a bill that had gotten some press up here, and I think it's probably the rest of the state, which was the coercive control bill that was essentially adding some non-physical abuse to domestic violence to include that. And that's a good bill, but there's actually bills in the legislature that are stuck in committee that do that and better. There's a bill out there that protects victims of domestic violence from having to cancel benefits and unemployment insurance when they have to move away to protect themselves from a domestic violence issue. There's also a bill that allows for the immediate or requires immediate removal of guns upon entry of a domestic violence order by the courts. There's also a bill that protects domestic violence victims from malicious civil lawsuits. So if an aggressor of that is filing lawsuits in a way to kind of make it harder for that person to seek justice, there's an avenue for that with the bills by allowing sanctions for filing those lawsuits. And it also creates procedures for law enforcement to identify domestic violence. I'm kind of a criminal defense attorney and an attorney by nature, and one of the things that I find a lot of times is there's calls, police officers call service, and they go in and the situation is kind of resolved to a point to where they're not yelling and screaming at each other, and then law enforcement gets out, largely because both parties are not as cooperative as they should be, or as they just decided that it's best for them to not pursue it any further, but it allows law enforcement to kind of get that on their own and make that decision. One of the other things it requires is a centralized court tracking system of protective orders that are dismissed. So if a protective order is dismissed early on, there's a centralized court tracking. So you can just kind of track them and see what's going on with them, where they're being dismissed. And it also extends the time a domestic violence victim can be protected from the initial protection order if the aggressor is unserved. So presently, right now, a person that is accused of domestic violence and they're not personally served with it, that can't go on, and there's a specific time frame that can exist until it gets dismissed. Currently, it's 6 months. Right now, there's a bill in the committee that would extend that to 12 months. The other thing on those is they can't go forward with those until the personal service. Every court does it differently, but it would standardize it to where the victim of domestic violence does not have to show up for court and choose like not going to work to keep that case from getting dismissed. So those are kind of, as far as the domestic violence, I think those are the bills I think that would be good bills that we could maybe get out of committee.
It's interesting because we don't hear those, and it just seems they kind of seem no-brainer.
The second area is school safety, and one of the bills prohibits school districts from using fully driverless buses when transporting students. So there's a bill that wanted to kind of look at driverless buses, and so there's a bill that prohibits that. But it also requires cameras to be installed at school bus stops as well as in school buses. So they can so people can see what's going on, and there's a record of that. There's also mandatory preschool for 3 to 4 year olds. So that's the that mandatory kindergarten and preschool. And there's a bill that gives 5% raise for eligible employees inside the school systems. There also is a bill that requires public schools to post an abstract, kind of like what you see when you work, for the EEOC of child labor laws for grades 6 to 12. And it also provides paid leave time and services for school employees who are injured under assault at school. So it gives them an avenue so where they don't have to take off work, and they can get paid time leave and services if they need mental health services for that. So those are the bills regarding school safety. The third area it's tax relief for everyday life. One of the things we saw in the legislative session was House Bill 1 was the income tax, where they're trying to move it to 0%. And although I think we should be making taxes as affordable for people, there's more than just income taxes of doing that. There's a lot of bills proposed by the Democrats that are doing tax credits for everyday life challenges. And just an example of some of these is tax credits for baby and personal care products, caregiver costs, qualified home modifications. There's an employer tax credit to hire and maintain an apprenticeship program. There's also a tax credit for breast pump storage and collection supplies, as well as feminine hygiene products. There's also a bill that allows voters to decide whether they want to exempt food ingredients, prescription drugs, and residential utilities for residential areas and farm. And there's also a graduated tax credit for child expenses. Now, this is, keep in mind, there's also Governor Beshear vetoed it was a line item veto of the funding where they did a tax credit for purchase of gold sales. He had vetoed that and they overrode their veto. So there are tax credits on their side, but it's for gold, and a lot of these are for everyday supplies that make our lives easier and better and more affordable.
I was just going to say I haven't purchased any gold lately, and I think it's kind of hard to diaper your kid with a brick of gold. So the everyday items sure makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, and there was some articles going on between, diapers, tax credit for diapers or gold, but that's kind of where a lot of that stuff's coming. The fourth area is helping out employees in their jobs. So there's a bill out there that allows you to terminate a lease if you have to move because of your job. It also increases wages, so it's kind of a minimum wage, increases wages for larger companies, not smaller ones, because you don't want to hamper small businesses. Also for essential employees and companies who receive governmental incentives and subsidies. So this is a really interesting one in that what they're doing is they're tying the fact that you're receiving government subsidies and government incentives that they're going to require you to increase your wages. So the taxpayers, you're not getting the tax benefit while the taxpayers are paying to subsidize them because they're not paying them enough. There's also paid sick time after 90 days. And provide 20 maternity days for school district employees who gave birth. And it also bans employers from making an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, a condition of employment or employment benefits. So those are the ones involving the employment realm. The next one is healthcare. Some of these are really there's a lot of ones involving the certificate of need, but that's for different probably topics. But as far as healthcare that affects everyday people, it requires healthcare plans that cover counseling for pregnant and postpartum mothers and prescriptions for that, which includes K-CHIP. It also requires many health insurance policies to provide coverage for annual mental health exams. The next topic is gun safety. So there's bills that create a process to access court for red flag laws. So if someone has them, if you feel like they're a danger to themselves or others, it allows you to go to court to have the court order them to take their guns so they provide safety to the community. It also requires gun locks, and for anyone who sells guns and ammunition to report any loss or theft. And it also prohibits, and they define it, on unlawful storage of firearms. Interesting in that, though, it does give there's a lot of people that are concerned that if a gun's taken from their house, that it's going to be used, they're going to be liable. There's a specific defense for that if it's stolen and it's used in a crime, that you don't seek liability, there's no liability for you. It also requires law enforcement to put firearm information in the national databases during a criminal investigation so they can see if that was a part of any crime anywhere else. And the last one, and this is actually the one that you asked me at the beginning why I got involved with this is the part that I'm really passionate about. It's kind of boring, but I'm calling it Make Government Work Better for More People. And there's bills out there that requires pre-filing of bills. So previously, way back when, you could go to the legislative website and you could see all the bills that were filed probably by November, December. There are some pre-filing of bills, but those are largely, a lot of that's by the wayside. They're kind of filing them with the 3-day notice, I think, is what's required. So it doesn't give the public the ability to kind of see what's going on. It also removes the statute of limitations for any civil action arising from childhood sexual assault or abuse. This isn't criminal, this is civil, so it removes that. This other one is really interesting. It caps medical debt interest and judgments at 3%. So presently they can charge over 3%, but there's a bill out there that would cap that at 3% interest. It also bans disconnection of gas and electric services during extreme hot and cold. It also allows ballot initiatives for citizens to do ballot initiatives. Currently, it can only be done through the legislature. A lot of states allow them to do it if you get a certain amount of votes and signatures, so it allows you to do it in Kentucky. It also requires public colleges to have Narcan available. And that is actually paid through an opioid remediation program, so it would not necessarily be tax dollars. And last but not least, it allows families to install cameras in residential facilities. So if you have a loved one that's staying in a residential facility because because they're elderly or they're dependent or not able to take care of themselves, it gives you the ability to install cameras so you can make sure that they're safe. Actually, that happened in a family member of mine where there was a really bad broken leg, and we were not able to really figure out what happened. So if we bring these bills up, a lot of times, it kind of cuts against the narrative that we're kind of out of touch and we're just focusing on social issues. Those issues that we vetoed are important, but they're important because they're part of these bigger policy prescriptions and beliefs that we hold in these principles that is basically making government as accessible to as many people as possible, which these are the stories I think that the voters need to hear.
I mean, I know I'm biased, but yeah, that just makes so much sense. And plus, as I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm just thinking about how much thought went into what do people really need? What are people experiencing in their everyday lives, and how can we make it better? I mean, you see that step by step versus in a lot of respects, kind of random culture war type stuff that we see often from the other side. So really, really thought provoking stuff.
Keep in mind, and we'll probably explain this more as we go through the year. The fact that they're not letting these go through committees are actually choices as well. They're choices the same way that the Democrats are making choices to protect marginalized people through these bills.
Yeah, and this is exactly why we need people like you running for office to bring these things to life. And you, as you said, you did run for office, and so just to kind of pivot to that for a little bit. And I don't know if you're planning on running again, but if you kind of had a wish list of things that you would ask of the people, what would make it, I guess, easier or more pliable for candidates to win in Kentucky? Like, do you have any kind of wish list items that would be required?
We had a lot of support from the Democratic Party, the Kentucky Democratic Party. But there are areas, because they had changed our district 65th to kind of spill into the suburbs. And there were times I was knocking on doors in some of those areas where there had not been a Democrat knocking on doors for a local office for 45 years. It's hard for us to talk to people in those areas that we haven't spoken to. And so one of the things we want to do with this is kind of create a blue book or a blueprint to be able to do this. And I think one of the things I think we're missing is this, right? So we can sit there and give someone a kind of just a concrete, I have the luxury, not I'm a lawyer, right? So I can kind of read through this stuff. And this took me probably 20 hours, 20, 25, 30 hours. But I was able to do it because I was able to kind of, okay, this is what this means. And it's really super overwhelming, right? And they make it really hard to figure out. And when I was going to these town halls and meeting people were asking me about bills, and I didn't know about a lot of them. And I'm hoping that something like this can give people kind of like a quick and dirty of the bills that are good and the bills, kind of what's going on, so people can have an idea so they can talk intelligently on them. Because the fact of the matter is, and the 65th is different than the 69th, which is different than some of these other ones. But if you have this at your disposal, the candidates know their communities really well, right? They know their communities really well. They know their districts really well. They know their neighbors really well. But there's a lot of times where like this stuff we don't have a knowledge of this, just because it's really hard. They make it really hard for us to see what's going on. And I think that's the other thing I want to do with this, to start educating the area that the Democrats can actually be the ones that are not only giving you good policies, but we're also going to tell you what's going on down there instead of making it hard. When we start having candidates, we're doing these to win, but in some of these areas, we're also doing it to start educating them and sitting there saying, you need to have a different relationship with your government than you previously had.
Well, there you have it. Great information. Yeah. So, Aaron, before you leave, so just to lighten things up, get people to know about our guest a little bit, we do this little lightning round where I ask you 5 questions. Are you up for that?
Sure.
All right, here we go. Let's do it. So, if you could create a new political party, what would their mascot be?
Probably a bear or a raven.
I like the bear. I'm saying bear.
Yeah, I mean, the bear is kind of my first call. I think the raven is, first of all, a group of ravens can be a congress of ravens. So you sit there and say that.
You got that.
But historically, ravens have kind of been these really wise people that lead people through difficult times. And a lot of times they're kind of the truth tellers when people don't want to hear that, but they're ultimately guiding people to the right place.
Well, this one's easier. Are you a cat guy or a dog guy?
Dog.
Okay. Which fictional character would make the best president?
So it's 2 characters with 30 years apart. The first one is in the movie Seven. It was what's his name? William Somerset, who is Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman's character in that, and then the Noah Wiley's character in that new show, The Pit. It's people that they have this really realistic view of the world, but they have this positivity and they treat everybody with respect and give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think that type of character, I think makes people really good leaders.
I know you're a Cupcake guy. What was your favorite high school extracurricular activity?
So, I mean, I was kind of it was sports. I wasn't terribly athletic, but I played soccer for a few years and then I went on the track and cross country. So those are my extracurriculars.
All right, last question. The quirkiest roadside attraction in Kentucky that everyone needs to see.
I've been in really far-flung parts of the state. So there is a place, and I don't know if it still exists. I was in there like 5 years ago, and it existed. It's not a huge attraction, but it's down like east of Moorhead. And it's called the Heart's Bible and Tire. So it's a tire store that sells Bibles and tires.
I love it. You're just such a fantastic resource, and I think your decision to go through those bills and try to turn them into common language and also make them applicable that other candidates and the constituency can start to read and really understand what Democrats are doing is super important and very insightful. And we just really appreciate you joining us today and walking us through it.
Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. This is like a thing I'm really passionate about, and this is the way I feel like I can really provide like help to the community on this type of stuff, just kind of educate them and make everybody a little bit more knowledgeable because it's really hard to get this information.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, it shows, and we appreciate it so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate having Aaron Currin join us today, and that, Natalie, takes us to our final segment of the podcast, one of our favorites, the call to action. What have you got this week?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to bring my call to action back to that whole voter registration thing that we talked about. So we're going to link some information on our website on how you can change a part affiliation. And, so if you know someone who will be turning 18, if you know people like we do who feel that this new mega party doesn't align with them anymore, we're going to give you information on how to make that change. And then one really big upcoming event that I have to talk about is our county reorganization, which is going to take place on May 4th. At 2 o'clock, from 2 o'clock to 4:30 at the Erlanger Public Library. We're also going to link this information to our website and our socials as well. So again, this is just a chance for you to get involved in the party, either at the precinct level, the county executive committee level, and you can even be a delegate to the state party convention. So that's what's on my political calendar. Brian, how about you?
Well, just as a reminder to our listeners, kind of the public call to action, the rallies and everything that I've been very interested in, and they're just continuing to grow, as I'm sure everybody has seen, and I think making an impact at a national level. There are three main websites I keep my eye on. It's, as you recall from our last pod, indivisible.org, and 5051, which is 5050 spelled out .one, and mobilize.us. And Mobilize is kind of the central scheduling tool that a lot of political organizations use to spread the word about events and capture RSVPs. And again, a quick web search on whatever tool you use can get you to the correct web page for any of these sites. On our last podcast, I was looking forward to a rally sponsored by 5051 in downtown Cincinnati on April 19th, and I did attend it, and it was fantastic. I've heard differing estimates to how many people actually attended, but I believe it was close to 1,000. We gathered at Pyatt Park in downtown Cincinnati, which is on Garfield Place, right across from the main library, and then marched 5 blocks to the Federal Building on 5th and Main. And we thought it was really cool the way the city of Cincinnati respected the demonstration enough to be able to clear the streets and allow us to march, because it really, I think, helped people get more involved, and a lot of bystanders. We saw people join in as we were marching by, etc.
And I ran into you. It was fun.
That was great. Cincinnati Mayor Aftab Purval actually kicked off the march at Pyatt Park, which we did not expect, and he had a pretty rousing speech. It really got everybody going. And just as with all the previous rallies, and Natalie, I'm sure you you felt the same way. I left feeling inspired and hopeful and comforted in knowing there are so many people out there that are just dissatisfied with the direction of our country and our government and are, who want to make things better and want change. And we do have opportunities coming up this Thursday, which our pod typically drops on Thursday. So I'm hoping that people will listen to it early and then can still get out to some of these rallies on what they're calling the May Day National Day of Action. And there are several rallies nationwide. Locally, there are going to be rallies in Lexington and Covington, Kentucky. There are 2 in Cincinnati, and also a rally up in Loveland and one in Mason, Ohio. And those are the nearby ones. Also rallies across Ohio and Kentucky and across the nation. There are also additional events on Saturday, May 3rd. There's going to be another Tesla takedown at the Tesla dealership that's under construction on Ridge Avenue in Cincinnati, and some other rallies that I've seen on May 3rd, Saturday as well. So lots of opportunities for our listeners to join the movement that is demanding change.
That's awesome, Brian. So many ways to get involved, either at the party level or at the activist level. So we'll look forward to those events. That is it for this week. Thank you so much for joining the Blue Dot Podcast. We'll be back in 2 weeks to deliver the latest and greatest updates for you, as well as your call to action to help grow the Blue Dot in the Bluegrass. And you can keep the Blue Dot banter going by joining us in the conversation at bluedotpodcast.com or on our Facebook and Instagram pages. And so until next time, stay curious, keep the facts in focus, and never stop fighting for what matters. Peace out, everybody.